haven't met you, I'm one of the pastors here, and one of the things that I get to do here at the 180 is to work with our teens and our youth, and I oversee our youth ministry. Did you enjoy that video? That was a good video? Good, I'm glad. Yeah, you could clap. I mean, you could clap. It's not for me, I don't know. Many of you know that last weekend we had a youth retreat, and many of you have been asking how it went and everything, and I'm still okay. I haven't lost any hair. I got a haircut, though. But for some reason, I can't let go of the smell of feet. It's just following me. I think it's just maybe me. But anyways, we had a great time last weekend. I wish I could give you the whole retreat in just a few minutes, but it's here's a picture of the group, of the youth group from the retreat. We had a nice group there with us, and you know, one of my favorite parts of the retreat was Saturday night. And Saturday night was one of the things that we talked about was that as a youth group, we don't just exist for our own sake, right? And you saw that in the video. That we don't just exist for our own little kind of community with me and my buddies, but actually we're learning what it means to exist for the sake of others. And one of the things that we did at the retreat Saturday night was this is kind of like a tradition for us, is that we put up pictures of the kids that attend this church, the little kids that you saw here. And we put up those pictures, and we just started together as a group, just started saying, okay, what do we want for these kids? And that's a form of prayer, by the way. You just say their names before God, and you just say, you know, what I want for that little girl is that she keeps her joy, and that nobody takes it away from her. What I want for that little boy is that he keeps his creativity. And we started seeing our youth do that kind of thing. And what happens when we do that, it starts to stir something really powerful in us, doesn't it? When we start to pray for other people, it starts to reveal things in our hearts that we maybe didn't know was there. And that was such a powerful, I wish I could give you like a snapshot of what was happening as we started even praying for kids that are gonna be in youth next year. And some of the youth that were there praying were getting emotional because prayer has this powerful way of starting to reveal things that are in our hearts we didn't know were there. Right? That's why, by the way, Jesus said, learn to pray in the closet. The closet, or your car, or in the shower, right? The point is, learn to pray in the place where you're all alone, because when you're all alone, the truest part of yourself starts to come out. That's the best way to pray. And I'm going to now connect this to the desert, because we've been in a series on the desert. Have you enjoyed the series so far? Not so much? Okay, no, Dom? Yeah, sorry. We've been in the series on the desert, and you know, I was thinking about this, and the desert really has this way of getting us to this place where we feel alone. And the desert has this really powerful way of starting to reveal things in our hearts that we didn't know were there. And so maybe you've heard this song, Down in My Heart. Maybe if you grew up in church, you've sang it, right? How does it go? I've got the joy. All right. Down in my heart. Where? All right, you guys are good. We could go home, I think. Right, so it's a great song. We love that song. We're going to go home, sing it with your friends. But then we know that as we grow up and we mature, we start to realize that Jesus comes to us gently and says, I have to show you what is down in your heart. I have to show you what is down in your heart. And here's the thing, we will all enter the desert. We will all have moments where we enter into the desert, and we could ignore it, we could delay it, but you cannot escape it. You will eventually have to face the desert. You will eventually have to face the desert. A few years ago, there was a study done at Harvard, and you'll see behind me, and it was called Just Think, the Challenges of the Disengaged Mind, and maybe some of you might have heard about this, and they were trying to figure out how people handle being alone with their thoughts. And you know what they found was that most people would rather electrocute themselves than be left alone with their thoughts. Isn't that crazy? Most people would rather experience the pain of electrocution to distract themselves with being alone with from being alone with their thoughts, because what starts to happen? things start to come up they'd rather not deal with. Now, this is important because as we talk about the desert, because the desert is this place where you start to feel alone, and you start to feel like these things are starting to come up. And so this morning I want to talk to you about and look at this question: what is the desert for? What is the desert for? And I know there's a kind of a danger in talking about this because if we talk about the purpose of the desert, we might start to think, okay, tell me what I need to do to get there, and we might try to just rush our way to the end, to the goal. Right? How can I get there faster? And we fail to realize that actually the process is actually a very important part. The journey is actually really important. The part of wandering in the desert is actually really important. So we can't rush our way through the desert. We can't fast track the desert. And that's hard for us because we're not used to waiting. We're not used to slow things. When I have a headache, I take a Tylenol, right? Actually, I'm more of an Advil guy, but that's unimportant. But we apply those expectations to God. And when we apply those expectations to God and to our spirituality, we're going to get really disappointed. There is no Advil for Christian spirituality. There is no 3 easy steps. There's no magic pill, although you might want to try these, which I found on the internet. Oh, there's a Jesus pills. You can find anything on the internet. So if you want to let us know how that works, but maybe don't waste your money. I think they're mints, actually. I'll be honest. They're mints. So maybe some of you need to buy that. Just kidding. We will all enter the desert, and we cannot fast track the desert. And yet, the Bible gives us this picture of what the desert is for and what happens in the desert. And I want to look at this text in Deuteronomy. And it's a text that kind of, Israel, if you know the story of Israel, Israel spends a long time in the desert. And they're wandering in the desert for a really long time. And they get towards the end of this journey and wandering, Moses kind of gives a summary of what it was like and why they were in the desert and how God used this desert experience. Okay, so you're going to see it right behind me, and I'll just read it. And we'll look at this together, okay? This is what it says. It says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you." So let me just backtrack in the story of Israel here. You probably know a little bit about this, but the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt for a very long time. They were slaves to this kind of tyrant named Pharaoh in Egypt, and who really dehumanized them and oppressed them. And then finally, after a very long time of this, God steps in and he calls a man named Moses and says, "I'm going to use you to set these people free." Okay? To set them free from slavery. And then we probably know this part of the story. These really amazing things start to happen. Right? The river turns into blood, and there's a picture here that you could see, right? All of these amazing things. The river turns to blood. The country is filled with frogs, and then with lice, and then a swarm of wild animals, and boils, and thunderstorm of hail, and fire, locusts, darkness, death, the sea parting. All these amazing supernatural things, and we're captivated by this part of the story. It makes sense. It's so strange and unique, and we know that there's, laws of nature. So how does this all work? And it's very fascinating to us. But you know what's even more fascinating? Is that this isn't actually the focus of the story in the book of Exodus. Maybe you've seen Disney's version of the story, The Prince of Egypt. And they spend the whole movie focusing on this part of the story. And yet, in the book of Exodus, it takes about 5 chapters. 5 chapters. That's really the introduction to God's plan to set Israel free. See, the supernatural part is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. The real Exodus, actually, the real freedom from the powers of Egypt happens not in the few days and not in the few chapters, but in 40 years of wandering in the desert. This is fascinating because it tells us that it's in the mundane and difficult and boring and dry and repetitive and painful moments of our lives that God is at work. In maybe a more mysterious way, in more a hidden way. And most people miss this. We get so caught up in the supernatural. We get so caught up in the external miracle, and then we miss the fact that it's in the everyday, the mundane, the boring, the dry, where God meets us in a very powerful, powerful way. So, I want to start by looking at these very important words in the text that we just read, and it says, to know what was in your heart. See, God uses the desert to amplify, to shine a light on what is in our hearts. What is in our hearts? Now, in our culture, the way we talk about the heart is a little bit different than how the Bible talks about the heart. And how many comic fans? Comic book, web comics? Yep, the 2 of you? Great. Now, there's a web comic, maybe you've seen it online, and it's been in the New York Times. It's really funny, you can look it up. It's called Heart and Brain. Here's a picture, Heart and Brain. Anybody heard of this? Okay. Heart and Brain, where the brain is always kind of moving towards adult responsibilities, and the heart is moving towards utter nonsense, right? And so in our culture, that's how we talk about the heart or the head and the brain. The brain is the logical part, the rational, the unemotional, right? The Sherlock Holmes, right? Just thinking, always just the thinking thing. And the heart is this emotional, erratic, irresponsible part of us. And sometimes it feels this way. Sometimes it feels like we have these 2 people in us. And maybe some of us feel like, oh, well, I'm more of the brain or I'm more of the heart. And it's very normal to have this experience. But in the Bible, the heart isn't just a symbol of emotions and feelings. It includes them, but it's actually so much more. In the Bible, the heart is this place where everything happens. There's no, in biblical Hebrew, there's no concept of the brain. There's no word for the brain. So all intellectual activity happens in the heart. But the heart isn't just the seat of our emotions. It's the place where we think. It's the place where we know. And maybe you noticed this in verse 5. It said that they would know in their hearts. That they would know in your heart. You can know from your heart. You can know from your heart. And maybe you know the story of Mary. Mary pondered and treasured things in her heart. The heart is a place where we have desires. So in the Bible, the heart is used to describe the person as a whole. Okay? The intellect, memory, emotions, desires, choices, it all comes from the heart. Represents the part of you that can think, that can feel, that can be afraid and courageous. It could love, it could hate. It could be hopeful, it could be hopeless. It could be humble, and it could be proud. Every part of who we are and what we do comes from the heart. The decisions we make, the way we manage our time, the way we spend our money, the way we talk to our kids is a reflection of the heart. That's why we know that maybe the famous proverb, which you'll see behind me, that it says, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Your whole life. And so God uses the desert to shine a light on our hearts, to amplify, to start to reveal things in our hearts, not just our emotions, but the deep part of what makes you who you are. A couple months ago, I was reading this this text, and I was looking at it, and something just really popped out at me in a new way. And I had this question, and you'll see it behind me. The question was, who needs to know what is in my heart? Who needs to know? Who needs to know? Do you ever wonder this? Does God need to know? Like, is God this detective who needs to somehow set up a desert situation because he needs to figure you out? Now, in case you're unsure, I'll be very clear. God already knows what is in my heart and what is in your heart. The psalmist says, you know when I lie down, and you know when I get up. You perceive my thoughts from afar, right? Search me and know me. God already knows. He doesn't need a desert to figure you out. So, if God isn't the one who needs to know what's down in my heart, then who does? I do. God uses the desert not so that he can get to know you, but so that you can start to learn about what's in your heart. Jeremiah is a prophet, and later on in the story of Israel, he says this, he's seeing Israel just abandoning God, and he says the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Who can understand the heart? Sometimes we know that this feeling, right? Desires that I don't want to desire, and I'm doing the things I don't want to do. There are things in our hearts that we don't even know are there. And yet God decided that he wants us to know. He wants us to know what is in our hearts. Apparently, God wants us in on the miracle. Apparently, I'll fix this here. Apparently, God wants us to be part of the process of freedom. God wants us to know what is in our hearts because, it wasn't just the supernatural things that happen in Egypt. He brings us to a place of the desert because the freedom is going to happen in the desert. We start to learn about who we are. Now, there's an implication to this. It kind of tells us something, and Jeremiah tells us that, we are experts at avoiding, at dismissing, at ignoring what's down in our hearts. We need help with this. We're not good at this. We're really good at pretending like everything's okay. We're really good at hiding what's really down there. And if you've ever been, you'd probably know this, if you've ever been interviewed for a job, and the classic question that we all hate comes up, it's, what are your 3 weaknesses? I work too hard. Right? I care too much, right? I'm too dedicated to my job. It's really bad, right? We're stumped. We don't know what to say, right? Because there's something about that, about the human heart that's deceptive. We don't know what's in our heart sometimes. And God says, I know, and I have to show you now. I have to show you what's in your heart. Now, I just want to clarify here because God is not some cosmic therapist who sits you down on his couch and starts to ask you all these questions and gives you a personality test, although those could be helpful, and says, well, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and we're going to work on these habits. No, that's not what we're talking about. This is much bigger than that. Thank you. I'm going to do a little switcheroo here. Testing. Test. This is much bigger than just a personality test. This is much bigger than just knowing the strengths and the weaknesses. See, this is the kind of knowing that leads to this kind of restoration and healing and growth. It's a kind of self-knowledge that actually draws us closer and closer to God. And by the way, this is a theme all throughout the Bible. That as people were getting closer to God, as people got closer to Jesus, they became more aware of what was in their heart. Not in a shameful way, not in an embarrassing way, but in a way that actually leads to restoration and healing and growth. In a way that actually leads to prepare the person to be part of something much bigger. So I'm a dad. I've been a dad now for about a year and a half. For about a year and a half. You've been waiting for the story about my son. Here it is. And so my son has been going through a kind of phase over the last year and a half of his life of just whenever I'm in the room, I have to be with him, right? I have to be like on the floor. I can't even sit on the couch if we're in the same room. I have to be on the floor playing with him, or he has to be in my arms. Right, and in case you don't believe me, because I feel like you're doubtful, here's a picture. That's him begging me to. This is my life, and I give him everything he wants. Like I'm a sucker. That's it. I know. It's just those eyes, right? He just when he comes to me and says, "Papa, Papa," right? I'm just whatever you want. I'll give it to you. You want the knife? Sure. No, don't do that. Don't do that. And so a few weeks ago, he goes to daycare, and sometimes I drop him off, or Bethany does, and I was bringing him. He was in a good mood. He was happy, and I bring him to daycare. As soon as I pass him off, he looks at me and he just cries, right? And he's like, "Papa!" It's like from a movie, and he goes, and I'm like, "Sorry, bud," and I leave, and I just kind of feel good, right? I was like, "That's so cute. He needs me, you know?" And a few days later, same thing happens, and this time I'm preparing him for it, and I know it's going to come, and I'm like, you got to go to daycare, you know? And I drop him off, and this time he sees a ball in the room, and he just leaves. And I'm like, bye. And he didn't even say bye, he didn't look at me, he just totally forgot that I existed. And I leave that, and I'm like, why didn't he cry? Why didn't he cry? It's probably better. I want him to cry. And I know that's kind of a silly story, but there's moments, right, in our lives, everyday moments, where we learn what is in our hearts. We learn this, maybe I need to be needed, right? Or we learn and we get those insights that maybe all of my desires and plans for my kids to succeed are more about me than they are about them. That the sacrifices that I've made for them are just more about me than about that. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen here. Some of you are parents of teenagers, and you're like, "We have been in the desert for years." We know you're late for everything. You stopped shaving, both of you. Right? But the day will come where, and if it hasn't come, it will come, where you realize that they are just a mini version of you, right? And God starts to show you what's in your heart. And right, everything you wanted to change and fix about them is actually there because of you. And don't worry, it's going to happen to them too. They'll eventually get to the day where they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I'm my mom," right? And that's probably going to lead them into the desert. These things happen all the time. These are daily things that happen to us, and it could happen at work, right? It could happen when your coworker gets the promotion or the celebration and you didn't, but you work better than they do, and something in you is like starting to surface, right? Or you're at church and you're like, "Did you see who just walked in? She hasn't been here in weeks. Did you see?" It's okay. You don't know, right? These moments in our lives that our hearts start to be revealed. These are everyday moments, and the thing about these everyday moments is that they're so easy to ignore. They're so easy to be like, "Nah, I'm fine." But in the desert, they get intensified. These insights get intensified. All of a sudden, you can't ignore it. Because in the desert, you can't take anything with you. In the desert, you got to kind of scale down on the baggage that you carry. You can't take Netflix to the desert. You can't take your phone into the desert. Apparently, our teens don't know this. We had a discussion time a few weeks ago, and the discussion was, or the question was, if you're stranded on a desert island, what 3 things would you bring? Every one of them, my phone. I'm like, whose kids are these? Do you guys not know how electricity works? I love you guys. But see, when we get to the desert, the things that we normally use to distract us start to lose their power. They start to lose, and that is one of the miracles of the desert. That's one of the best things that you could experience in the desert. Look at this next verse in verse 5. It says, He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, to teach you that man does not live on bread. You could change the word bread for pretty much anything. Does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. See, in the desert, God starts to teach us that the bread that we normally rely on will not give us life. And it starts to lose its power. It starts to lose it. See, listen, bread is good. Bread is great. You know, fresh baked bread, it's just amazing. There's nothing like bread. So basic, yet so special. God has nothing against bread, just so you know. This is the stuff of life, right? This is the creation that God gives us to enjoy. It's wonderful. But sometimes God takes us into a season and into a place to remind us that the good things that we enjoy will not give us life. They will not sustain us. They will not give us meaning. They will not give us purpose. And one of the miracles that could happen in the desert is that we start to lose interest in those things. We start to lose interest. That's one of the miracles of the desert. When we learn to say, I don't actually, like that's a great thing in my life, but I don't actually need that thing anymore. I've learned to say, God, you are enough. You are enough. I could live without, it's great, but I could live without that stuff. That's one of the miracles of the desert. This happened to me a few years ago. I was in college, and I was living away from home, and something happened to me, and I was in the desert. I was really in the desert, and I felt alone. I felt broken. I felt sadness, and I was, where am I going? When am I going to get there? What is the point of all this? I was really in the desert. And you know what started to happen? First, you're like, let me just go to the things that I normally enjoy to do, you know? But what started to happen is that those things started to lose their power. Suddenly, I'm not interested in television. I don't want to watch TV. Just not doing it. I just don't want to watch a movie, no. I don't want to play video games anymore. I don't even want to read a book. I don't want to learn. None of that. I don't even want to eat. I don't even want to go out to eat. And some of you know me, I love eating. Okay, let me just tell you something. When I go out to eat, I need to know in advance where we're going. Dom's already making fun of me. Because you put a menu in front of me, I am useless. I'm paralyzed. I need 24 hours. I need to look at that menu. I am an avid Yelp reviewer. You could find me on Yelp. I'm aiming for elite status this year. I love food. Dom's making fun of me right now, but what can I say? I treat every meal like it's my last. Okay. But I had this season in my life where it wasn't interesting. Food, eating out, games, all that stuff, work, it just lost its power. It lost its power. There are times where God brings us in these seasons. And listen, maybe it sounds like it was really painful, and it was. It was really, really hard. It was really, really painful, but it was a gift. It was a gift. In that season, I learned that God was drawing me closer and closer to Him. And teaching me that, Matteo, you don't live by bread alone. You don't live by bread alone. It's one of the miracles that we learn and experience in the desert. I think we need to pray this in our lives. We need to pray that we learn this and experience this in our lives. I dare you to pray that. Teach me, God, not to live on bread alone. Teach me that man does not live by blank, you could fill in the blank, alone. Success, a certain image, money, stuff, that doesn't give me life. Teach me. I pray this. Pray, God, make me no longer interested in Netflix. See what happens. See, look, we're not a church that's like against, like we're not anti-stuff. If you're new here, we're not like anti-technology or all that stuff is wonderful. It's a gift. We get to use it. We get to enjoy it. But there are seasons in our lives where God calls us to give up good things so that we could be reminded of what gives us life. You know what I'm talking about? By the way, that's why the desert isn't just something that happens to us. Sometimes it's something that we enter into. It's something that we choose. Many of you know we're in a season called Lent. Lent is this time in the calendar where Christians for centuries have treated this time as we move forward towards Easter as a time to be reminded that I don't live by bread alone. And that I can give up something good to be reminded of that. Because that thing doesn't have power on me. That thing will not, it happens so easily, where those good things we become so dependent on, and we let them go for a season to be reminded that man does not live on bread alone. God is the one who sustains everything. And we get to this place where we learn to say, God, you are you are enough. Even if my plans and my dreams and my hopes don't work out, it'll be okay, because you are enough. Your plans and your ways are way more life-giving to me than mine. Maybe you're in the desert right now, and you're waiting for something to change. You're waiting for a relationship to change. You're waiting for a job situation to change, health of a family member to change. Maybe God wants to teach you and me to say, God, whatever happens, you are enough. You are enough. The next verse, I want to look at the next verse with you. And it says this. It says, know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Now, you might not know this. This is actually wonderful stuff. This is beautiful stuff right here, because here's the problem. In our culture, we hear the word discipline, we get a little bit nervous, okay? But we need to reclaim a proper understanding of what discipline means, okay? Oftentimes what we do is we equate discipline with punishment. And I want to show you how punishment and discipline are very different. Very different. Punishment, okay? Punishment has to do with consequences. Okay? Punishment has to do, you behave in this way, okay? You hit your sister in the face. The consequences are no video games for a week, or you're in your room for the rest of the night, right? If you speed and you get caught, and the consequences are you get a ticket. The cop doesn't care where you were going. He doesn't care your story. He doesn't care about your family situation. You could try, but here's the penalty and here is the consequence, period. That's punishment, right? We have a saying, punishment fits the crime. Discipline is different. Discipline is different because the word discipline comes from the Latin word disciplina, which basically means instruction, okay? Instruction or teaching. So you go to school and you choose your area of discipline, right? Your area of study, math, medicine, whatever it is. Or you become a Christian, you become a disciple. A disciple, same word. Because Jesus said, come to me and learn from me. Learn from me. Right? The disciple is a learner. Now, so the problem with punishment is that it hands out consequences, but it doesn't care about instruction. It doesn't care about teaching. It doesn't care about offering guidance or wisdom. Do you see the difference? All punishment really teaches you is how to get away with it next time, right? This is the consequence. You got a ticket, download an app that tells you where the cops are. Come see me after, I'll tell you. Right? Or your kids, they're getting smarter. They're getting smarter because they know how to hide it from you. But punishment doesn't teach wisdom. It doesn't teach why you shouldn't do it. It only teaches how do you hide it better. Okay? So maybe it teaches strategy in a kind of deceptive way. Right? So discipline is very different because it's not so much concerned about consequences. It doesn't ignore consequence, but it's more concerned about instruction and restoration and healing. See, punishment is impersonal. Discipline is relational. In punishment, we experience shame. In discipline, we experience empathy. In punishment, we experience isolation. In discipline, we experience intimacy and restoration. See, if you believe in a God of punishment, a God of punishment says, you messed up, go away. Go to your room. I don't want to see you. I don't want to know you. I don't want anything to do with you. A God of discipline says, you messed up, but I'm coming towards you. I'm coming closer to you. A great theologian once said that in the incarnation and in the cross of Jesus, we see God's great act of empathy. You ever think of God as a God of empathy? Who feels what you feel? Who carries your burdens with you? Who enters into your pain? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there are no consequences. There are consequences to your actions, but God is not interested in just handing out consequences for the sake of consequences. God is interested in correcting, in instructing, in restoring, in offering wisdom. Wisdom. I've said this here before, and I felt like I needed to say this again today, is that, and you'll see behind me, is that whenever God corrects us, he always begins by saying with the words, I love you. I love you. And when we know with our hearts, that this is how God is, it changes everything. It changes the way we parent. It changes the way we lead. It changes the way we run our businesses. If you're a manager, if you have employees, it changes the way we treat people who are different than us. It changes everything. It changes everything. Last summer, we had a soccer camp for kids. You know, we hosted one here in the city. We had a lot of kids, and little kids, right? Little kids. And I remember it was a really nice time. And at one point, I saw this one kid who just seemed like he was all by himself. He's not the kind of kid to be all by himself. And so some of you know the story. And I'll call him Justin. That's not his real name, but I'll call him Justin. And so I go up to Justin and I say, hey, Justin, everything okay? What's the matter? And he said, yeah, Bobby was making fun of me, and he called me stupid. I said, oh, okay. Conflict resolution for 7-year-olds. Here we go. Okay, so this is what I did. So I go to Bobby, and that's not his real name, and I go to Bobby and I'm like, okay, Bobby, like, what happened between you and Justin? And as soon as I said that, he got so defensive, right? He was like, you took my colors. He started playing. He took the ball that I was playing with. He was being annoying. He was bothering me. He took my colors. He took my colors. He took my colors. And so what I did there is I stooped down like this to his eye level. Not below him, not above him. And I just said, it must have really bothered you that he took your colors. And as soon as I said that, his whole body changed. He said, yeah, it really bothered me. And I said, but Bobby, you know, it's not nice to call people stupid. And as soon as I said that, his face melted. His face melted, not because of shame, but because he felt what was in his heart. He realized the hurt that he did to his friend. And all he wanted to do in that moment was go be reconciled and restored to his friend. And so I said, why don't we go and see Justin and say sorry? Do you want to do that? And he's like, yeah. And so we go, and they say sorry. He's like, it's okay, I forgive you. They hug. They walk away. It was beautiful. Beautiful little moment. A God that comes to us and says, consequences, punishment. He says, get away, go away. That's not what God does. God comes to our level and says, I know the pain you're feeling. I know the burdens you're carrying. But I want to restore something in you. I want to heal something in you. I want to show you what's down in your heart. You know, we're good at hiding the depths of our heart, because what we might find in our hearts might embarrass us or make us feel ashamed, and so we get defensive. And maybe for some people, they will tell you that is exactly what God wants you to feel shame. He wants you to shame you into right behaving. That's not what we find in the Bible. That's not what we find when we look at the stories of Jesus. The band's going to come up, and we're going to sing another song together. You know, story after story about Jesus encountering different people, he has this really amazingly gracious and gentle and compassionate way of revealing what is in our hearts, what is in people's hearts. It's not shameful, it's not embarrassing, but it's restorative. So maybe some of you are in the desert today, and you're dying for a miracle. You are dying just for some water. You are dying for some life. And maybe today, the last thing you want to hear is some guy on a stage telling you what God wants to teach you in the desert. I get that. I get that. I get that. I don't want to just give you an easy answer. See, in the desert, we sometimes feel alone. We feel punished. We feel abandoned. We might feel that God is just done with us. But you look at the story of Israel. You know that even though they were wandering night and day, God never leaves them. He is a cloud by day and a fire by night. He does not leave them. He comes closer. God comes to you and comes closer to you in the desert. And he draws us closer to him. And today my prayer for you and for me is that in good and in bad, we simply learn to say, God, you're enough. Teach me that man does not live by bread alone. Teach me. Teach me. If we learn that, if we learn to say, God, you are enough, we'll experience a miracle. Won't you stand with me? Ben's going to lead us in a song.